For the better part of 2 decades, the finest motorcycle you could buy anywhere on Earth was assembled by hand in a village in Warwickshire that most Americans could not have placed on a map if you paid them. It was quicker than what Detroit's rivals were making. It was lighter. It went round a bend like it had been waiting all its life for the chance. And in the one market that mattered more than all the others combined, the vast, hungry, chrome-obsessed American market, it walked into Harley-Davidson's front room and made itself at home. This is the story of a machine that crossed an ocean and beat the home team on their own ground. And it is also the story of the people who owned that machine, understood exactly what they had. And then, through a run of decisions so careless they still read like fiction, let the whole thing slip through their fingers. The bike won. The country that built it lost. And the gap between those 2 sentences is where everything went wrong. To understand any of it, you have to start with the man who drew the shape. Edward Turner walks into Triumph in 1936 at the age of 35. The firm has just been pulled out of receivership by Jack Sangster, who owns Ariel and who now installs Turner as managing director and chief designer of a brand new outfit called Triumph Engineering. Turner did not come up through the usual channels. He had no grand institutional training behind him, no committee to answer to, no house style to inherit. He taught himself most of what he knew, and he brought to engineering something almost no other British designer of his generation possessed. He was a stylist. He cared what a motorcycle looked like sitting outside a public house on a Saturday afternoon every bit as much as he cared what it did at the top of 3rd gear. The line of a fuel tank, the ring of chrome around a headlamp, the exact shade of red on a machine in a showroom window, none of it was decoration to him. It was the whole argument. He understood a truth that the accountants who came after him never grasped. A man buys a motorcycle with his eyes first and his throttle hand second. In 1937, Turner puts that theory into metal. He builds the Speed Twin, a 500 cubic centimeter parallel twin, at a moment when every other manufacturer in the country is still bolting together heavy single-cylinder machines. It is lighter than they are. It is faster. It carries itself through corners with a poise the singles cannot touch. The trade press react the way you react when someone shows you something obvious that nobody thought to do. The Speed Twin becomes the blueprint. For the next 40 years, British motorcycling will draw, quite literally, from this engine. Every Tiger, every trophy, and eventually every Bonneville descends from it in an unbroken engineering line. The Tiger 100 follows in 1939, and then the war shuts the production lines. But the direction is set. What Turner cannot know, sketching in the late 30s, is that the very architecture that makes him a genius in 1937 will, 3 decades on, refuse to change fast enough to save the company standing on top of it. There is a second thing worth marking here, because it becomes the whole disease later. Sangster believed in Turner, but Sangster was a cautious man running a business that had recently gone under. The 2 of them fought over every line of the budget, over tooling, over specification. Those fights were commercial, and they were between 2 people who respected each other. Sangster knew what he was funding. He argued with Turner because he understood what Turner was building and wanted it built, properly. That is a particular kind of relationship, and it is worth naming clearly, because it is the thing that vanishes later and takes the company with it. An owner who knows what the product is, an engineer who is trusted to make it, money spent by people who understand what the money is for. That relationship, engineer and owner pulling in the same rough direction, is the thing that gets quietly poisoned in 1951 when BSA buys Triumph out from under Sangster. A different kind of boardroom moves in above the drawing office. The men in it do not argue with the engineers about tooling budgets because they do not especially understand what the tooling is for, and the contempt that eventually kills the whole industry does not arrive with a bang. It settles into the woodwork and waits 20 years. Now, the machine had a shape. What it needed was a market, and that market was being built without a single advertisement by an accident of the Second World War. By the peak of 1944, more than 1 million American servicemen were stationed in Britain, and a far greater number passed through before it was over. A handful of them rode Triumphs while they were here. Most rode British dispatch bikes of one make or another, but a great many of them, when the war ended and they shipped home, carried back an opinion that the American motorcycle industry had not accounted for and was in no position to answer. What these men fell for was not the Bonneville, because the Bonneville did not yet exist. It was the Speed Twin, and later the Thunderbird. It was that lighter, quicker, better balanced parallel twin. And when they got home to Ohio and California and Texas, they found Harley-Davidson and Indian still selling machines whose bones had been laid down in the early 1930s. Heavy frames, side valve engines, a riding position handed down from farm equipment. The returning soldiers had felt something better, and they said so, and the saying spread. It moved the way real reputation always moves, by word of mouth and by envy. From the veteran to his friend, from the friend to a younger brother, from the younger brother to some 16-year-old who had never thrown a leg over a Triumph in his life, but had been told again and again by men he trusted that a superior machine existed on the far side of the Atlantic. The customer was assembling himself in the American imagination years before the bike that would carry his money had even been designed. That is a rare and dangerous position for a company to be in, and it is worth understanding why it is dangerous as much as why it is a gift. A gift because the desire was already there, waiting, fully formed, before a single dollar had been spent to create it. Dangerous because desire that arrives before the product is desire the product then has to live up to. And if the factory cannot deliver, the disappointment is sharper than if the customer had never wanted the thing at all. The demand was ahead of the product. It was ahead of the factory. It was ahead of everything. And Triumph would spend the next 15 years running to catch up with a hunger it had done almost nothing to earn. And then Hollywood did the rest of the work for free. In 1953, Marlon Brando straddles a 1950 Triumph Thunderbird in the Wild One. The bike was handed over by Johnson Motors, Triumph's distributor on the West Coast. There is a comfortable myth that Brando insisted on the Triumph, wrote it into his terms, forced the studio's hand. The truth is duller and better. Brando simply rode Triumphs. Everyone involved knew it. And so the machine under the most famous screen rebel in America was a British parallel twin, and nobody thought to argue about it. The film itself was trouble. Several American towns banned it outright, and the controversy tangled the halo it created. The effect on sales was a slow build rather than a stampede, but the picture was permanent. The single most recognizable silhouette of the American outlaw biker, the one burned into the culture for the next 50 years, was sitting on a bike built in the English Midlands. Every poster for that film did the job of 1,000 salesmen, and it did it for a decade. The extraordinary thing, looking back, is how little of it Triumph engineered on purpose. The GI pipeline was an accident of the war. Brando was an accident of one actor's private taste. The company was the beneficiary of a cultural machine it neither built nor fully understood, and beneficiaries who do not understand their own luck tend not to protect it. Through the middle of the 50s, demand for British machines climbed and climbed. Importers started writing to the factory asking whether it could supply serious volume. It could not yet. The American supply chain was thin. The dealer network was small. The plumbing needed to serve a continent's worth of buyers simply was not there. Triumph was winning the war of desire and losing the war of logistics by 20 lengths. The love was real. The infrastructure to sell into that love was years behind. And this pattern, the product being adored faster than the company could organize itself to supply it, becomes the quiet signature of the whole story. Success kept arriving before the structures needed to hold it. Every time, the factory scrambled to catch up. And every time it caught up, it treated the catching up as proof that it could afford to relax again. Then came the moment that let Turner do the most audacious thing of his career. On the 6th of September 1956, a Triumph-powered streamliner called the Texas Seaguar, with Johnny Allen lying inside it, ran flat across the Salt at Bonneville, in Utah, at 214 miles an hour. The American Motorcyclist Association logged it as a world record. The international governing body in Europe threw the run out on a technicality that satisfied nobody. But the paperwork did not change what had physically happened on American ground with an American rider and a British engine. 3 years later, Edward Turner took the name of that salt flat and bolted it to his new 650 cubic centimeter flagship. He called it the Bonneville. It was either the most confident piece of naming in the history of British manufacturing or the cheekiest. And honestly, it was both. He was naming a road-going motorcycle after a speed record the sport's own governing body had refused to recognize, and daring anyone to correct him. The name went on to the drawings. The tooling was already being cut at Meriden. Within a year, the first one would come off the line. And what it did in America over the following 15 years is something Harley-Davidson, 6 decades on, has arguably still not fully forgiven. The T120 was shown at the Earl's Court exhibition in 1958 and went on sale in 1959. 649 cubic centimeters, twin Amal carburetors, a rev counter sitting right beside the speedometer, which told you everything about who this machine was for and what it expected of you. The factory claimed it was the fastest production motorcycle you could buy anywhere, and the journalists, having ridden it, stopped arguing. But speed was not the thing riders talked about afterwards. What they talked about was the handling. The Bonneville was slim. It was light. It turned in on the rider's own weight rather than fighting it, so that a bend simply arrived and the bike went round it without complaint or drama. Americans who rode one for the first time came away with the same unsettling feeling, described again and again in the same terms. It was as if everything they had ridden up to that point had been quietly wrong, and here, finally, was the thing done properly. By 1960, every American dealer who could get his hands on T120s was selling every single unit that reached him. If you have ever ridden anything that made you grin inside your own helmet, or you remember a father or an uncle who swore blind that nothing since has come close to a 60s Bonneville, then this is exactly the channel you should be subscribed to, because we are only halfway up the mountain, and the fall on the other side is steeper than anything you are expecting. The American operation ran through 2 distributors. On the West Coast, Bill Johnson's Johnson Motors worked out of Pasadena and covered 19 western states. On the East Coast, the Triumph Corporation, known to everyone as Tri-Corp, ran out of Baltimore and handled everything from Maine down to Texas. Between the pair of them, by the middle of the 60s, they were feeding the largest export market Triumph had ever had in its life. Johnson was the more visible of the two, largely because California was where the culture lived. He chose his dealers himself. He trained the mechanics. And he came down hard on any machine that arrived on the West Coast with a fault he knew would sour a first-time buyer inside a month, because he understood that in America, you got one chance at a customer's loyalty and no more. For a while, the whole thing worked like a well-set engine. The bikes came off the boat, the dealers moved them, the reputation grew, and the money flowed back across the Atlantic to a factory that could barely believe its luck. In its best single year, 1967, more than 28,000 Triumphs were sold across the United States, a record the marque would spend the next 4 decades failing to touch again. Read that number again and hold it, because it is the high water mark. Everything after it is the tide going out. And this is where the disease that had settled into the woodwork in 1951 begins, slowly, to eat outward. Because while the men at Meriden were building the best-loved motorcycle in America, the men who actually owned the company after the BSA takeover held the product itself in something close to disdain. This is the part I find hardest to get my head around even now. the people running one of the most desirable motorcycle brands on the planet did not especially care for motorcycles. They saw the operation as a source of cash to be pointed at other things. When engineers brought them broken prototype parts and asked for money to solve real problems, the failures got a mocking nickname and the conversation got ended. That was the culture. Contempt for the object, contempt for the men who made it, and a chronic, deliberate refusal to spend money on the future. You cannot run a company that way for long and survive, but you can run it that way for a surprisingly long time when the product is so good that it sells itself in spite of you. That is exactly what happened. The brilliance of the machine bought the boardroom years of cover for its own neglect, because the money was not being spent. BSA had not put meaningful investment into new tooling since the late 1940s. A great deal of the machinery turning out these world-conquering bikes predated the war. The engineers who had designed the twins that built the industry were aging, and nobody was being trained to replace what lived inside their heads. And all the while, on the other side of the Pacific, something was being built that the Birmingham boardrooms had already decided to ignore. Honda landed in America in 1958. It did not come for the leather jacket riders who bought Triumphs. It came for everyone else. Its small machines did not leak, did not shake your fillings loose, and started every single time you pressed the button. No ritual required. No patience demanded. By the early 60s, Honda was shifting these things by the tens of thousands a month, and the British response, spoken openly in the Midlands, was that the Japanese were making toys for people who did not really ride. That was the mistake that ended everything, and it was a mistake of imagination more than of engineering. The men buying a little Honda to get to work in 1962 were not going to stay on a commuter bike forever. They were the next generation of serious riders. And every one of them, when the day came that he wanted something faster and bigger, went straight back to the company that had sold him his first machine and treated him well. British management did not merely overlook Honda. It spent a decade politely handing Honda its own future customers, wrapped and addressed. And it did so while telling itself a flattering story, that the loyalty of the leather jacket rider was permanent, that a real motorcyclist would always come home to a British twin, that the Japanese would stay penned in the small capacity market where they belonged. Then in 1969, Honda released the CB750, 4 cylinders, an overhead camshaft, a disc brake, smooth, fast, dependable, and priced to be sold by the container load. By any measurement a person could actually take, it was a better motorcycle than anything coming out of Britain. It was not a commuter's toy. It was aimed squarely at the ground Triumph thought it owned outright, and the British answer to it was to assure everyone that their customers were loyal and would stay. They would not. And the industry was about to discover exactly how disloyal a betrayed market can be. Which brings us to the single most self-inflicted wound in the whole story, and it happened not in a boardroom but on the shop floor. For the 1971 model year, the group decided to rework the Triumph and BSA twins around a brand new frame. The idea was modernization. The problem was that the frame was rushed into production before anyone had properly confirmed that the engine would fit inside it. It would not. The oil-carrying frame was built too tight around the power unit, and the machines could not be assembled as designed. So on the line, men were reduced to working the frames by hand, forcing and relieving them until the engines could be persuaded into place. Bikes left the factory with hammer marks along the spine of the frame, and because the new chassis was also too tall, they reached American showrooms with a saddle height that left shorter riders unable to get their feet down. Sit with that for a moment. The nation whose motorcycles were a byword for precision engineering was shipping product to its most important market, with the marks of a mechanic's hammer still on the metal, because the company that drew the frame never checked whether its own engine would go inside it. The reputation did not die at a racetrack or out on the salt. it died in an assembly bay. And it died at exactly the moment the customer had a better, cheaper, more reliable alternative sitting in the showroom across the road. The rest arrived on a schedule you could almost have printed in advance. On the 10th of November, 1970, at the Royal Lancaster Hotel in London, the BSA Group threw a lavish event to unveil 13 revised BSA and Triumph models for the coming year, all at once. The presentation was glossy and expensive and had been in the works for months. The factory could not build a single one of the promises being made in that ballroom. Production through 1971 drowned in the frame fiasco and a dozen problems trailing behind it. The 350 cubic centimeter BSA Fury, one of the models the hype had been built around, never reached real production at all. And so the company missed the American spring selling season, the one window that mattered most. Dealers who had been holding their orders, waiting for the new range, picked up the phone and called Honda instead. A good number of them never called back. The group reported a loss across the whole business of £8.5 million for 1971. In March 1973, the shares collapsed on the London Stock Exchange, and 63 years of British motorcycle manufacturing came to rest on a stock ticker. The government was not willing to let the entire industry fold in public. Edward Heath's administration stepped in. Manganese Bronze Holdings, through its Norton Villiers arm, was brought in as a merger partner, a new company was stitched together out of the wreckage, and a new chairman was appointed to run it. His name was Dennis Poor. On paper, he looked like exactly the kind of man you would want: a King's College Cambridge engineering graduate, a former RAF wing commander, a Formula One driver, and the British hill climb champion of 1950. But the man who actually walked into the job was the chairman of an engineering conglomerate that had spent years buying up failing industrial firms and stripping them back to whatever numbers worked. And when he looked at Meriden, the factory that had built the bike that beat America, he did not see the bike, or the men, or the 15 years of conquered market. He saw an underperforming asset with a real estate value attached. He was not a cruel man, and it does the story no good to pretend he was. He was something more ordinary and more dangerous. He was a man who could read a balance sheet fluently and could not read a factory floor at all. Within weeks of the new company forming, Poor's people finished their assessment and reached the obvious conclusion for a man holding a spreadsheet. Meriden had to close. Production would be pulled back to Small Heath in Birmingham and to the Norton plant at Wolverhampton. One site was cheaper than two, and the Meriden land was worth money. Nowhere in the record of those meetings does anyone seem to have raised the roughly 1,700 people whose entire working lives were built around that factory, whose fathers had come through the same gates, whose sons were already on the floor. To the men in the room, it was a line item. To the village, it was the reason the village existed. And the way the decision was delivered made everything that followed inevitable. Poor came to Meriden, announced the closure to the workforce more or less to their faces, and left almost immediately for another meeting, declining to stay and answer for what he had just said. He treated the ending of 1,700 working lives as an item on an agenda he was already running late for. What happened next had no precedent in this country. On the 14th of September 1973, the Meriden workforce did not walk out, and they did not strike in any way anyone recognized. They chained the gates of their own factory shut from the inside and stood behind them. Locked in with them was something in the order of £10 million worth of finished Bonnevilles and Tigers that the new company could not move, could not sell, and could not put on its quarterly accounts. The capital was trapped behind padlocks the company itself owned. Worse for Poor, the specialist tooling and the working drawings for the Triumph Trident were sitting inside Meriden too, and when he tried to restart Trident production at Small Heath, his engineers had to tell him it could not be done quickly, because the drawings would have to be recreated from scratch. In his rush to announce a closure and please the bankers, the chairman had locked his own most valuable assets away from himself. The man who arrived to save the company by cutting it had instead handed its most militant workforce the one weapon that could bleed it out slowly. Every week the gates stayed shut, the money that was supposed to fund the rescue drained away into a standoff nobody had planned for. The standoff ran for 18 months. Going back through the Union records and the photographs, the men playing cards at the gate to keep warm through 2 winters, what stays with you is not the drama of it, but the exactness of the injustice. These were not faceless workers in a faceless dispute. These were the specific human beings who had built the machine that conquered the United States. And they were chaining shut their own gates to stop a man with a calculator from carrying it off. It had been 6 years since 28,000 Triumphs left this site in a single year, bound for America. Now the factory that made them was occupied by the people who made them, against the company that owned them, in defense of the bike itself. There is a strange dignity in it that is hard to describe. They were not asking for more money. They were asking to be allowed to keep building the best thing they knew how to build. Harold Wilson's Labour government came back in early 1974 and brokered a way out. The workforce received a government loan of £4.2 million, and they used it to buy the factory outright and form the Meriden motorcycle cooperative. For the next 8 years, the bike that had humbled America was built by the very people who had refused to let it be killed. The romance of that is real, and so is the arithmetic underneath it, which is harder. The cooperative that began production in 1975 was a shadow of the 1,700-strong workforce that had chained the gates. It started with only a couple of hundred members and never grew much beyond a few hundred. For its only legal customer, at first it had the very parent company it had fought, and the relationship was openly hostile. There was no research budget to modernize the engine, none at all. And so, the Speed Twin lineage, refined lovingly over 40 years but unchanged in its bones, was now going up against Japanese machines with overhead camshafts, electronic ignition, crankcases that did not weep oil, and disc brakes front and rear. It was the past competing against the present, and everyone honest could see how that ends. The men on the floor could see it most clearly of all. They kept building anyway, because the alternative was to admit that the thing they had given their lives to was already over, and no one gives that up easily. The loans were eventually called in. The money ran out. The last Meriden Triumph came off the line in August 1983, and the factory closed with no ceremony, the gates locked this time from the outside. That same year, a property developer named John Bloor bought the Triumph name from the receiver. There followed a quiet gap of several years, during which Bloor licensed a small operation in Devon to build Bonnevilles in tiny numbers, while an entirely new factory was designed and built at Hinckley in Leicestershire. The Hinckley plant produced its first machines in 1991. New engineers, new engines drawn from a blank page. The Bonneville name returned to the range in 2001, and the modern Triumph is, by any fair measure, a genuine success. Beautifully made, and the people who build it have every right to their pride. But there is no engineering thread running from Hinckley back to Meriden. It is a new bird risen from the ashes of the old, not the same one returned to life. The Hinckley story is a corporate triumph. The Meriden story is a working-class tragedy. And it does nobody any favors to pretend the two are the same thing. Stand on the old Meriden site today, and there is no factory to find. In its place, there is a housing estate, and the streets that run through it carry names a developer chose to honor whatever it was that once stood there. Bonneville Close, Triumph Crest, Daytona Drive. Names that mean precisely nothing to the children who ride their bicycles along them. Close your eyes for a second and put it back. Hear the parallel twins catching one after another down the assembly line, 60, 70, 80 of them in a day, and know that nearly every one of them is bound for California, for a stretch of Route 66, for a parking lot outside a Harley dealership, where, in a year or two, some young American is going to ride past a Bonneville and feel a flush of embarrassment about the machine underneath him. Smell the hot oil and the metal and the dry heat of a factory running flat out. See the men coming in through the gates their fathers came through, certain, without needing to be told, that they are building the best motorcycle on earth. And they are right. The figures from America say so. Hollywood says so. Harley-Davidson's own accountants say so. Now open your eyes. The sign on the corner reads, Bonneville Close. The men who built the machine that gave the road its name are not here. Their factory is not here. Their tools are gone. For 15 years, this country made the finest thing of its kind anywhere in the world, and the whole world knew it and paid for the privilege and lined up for more. We did not lose it to Honda's engineers, though they were formidable. We did not lose it to the market, though the market moved fast. We lost it to the people who owned it and could not be bothered to look at what they were holding. They inherited a machine that beat America and a workforce that could build it, and they treated both as a problem to be managed down rather than a fortune to be defended. The bike won America. Britain lost the bike. And of all the things I have gone back through on this channel, few of them sting quite like the distance between those two facts. If this is the kind of story you come here for, the boardroom decisions, the reality on the factory floor, what it actually felt like inside an industry as it threw away the market it had already won, then subscribing is what keeps these films finding the people who lived through them. There is a great deal more of this to tell.